Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the 2016 Latin American Business Conference, Latin America Surging as the Next Business Frontier. I am Manuel Moreno, a second-year full-time MBA student at the UCLA Anderson School of Management and co-president of the Latin American Business Association, known as LABA. Our organizing committee is comprised of LABA leadership, valuable members of UCLA's Latino Business Student Association, the UCLA Anderson Center for Global Management, and the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, who have all worked very hard to bring this conference to you. And we are extremely proud to have everyone joining us here today. I hope that everyone will enjoy the conference, as well as learn from the influential private and public sector leaders from across multiple industries and disciplines who invest and conduct business in and within the Latin American region. Our guest speakers will provide important insights on Latin America's business environment and consider what is yet to come as Latin America contemplates its future and return to stronger economic growth, diversifies beyond commodities, stimulates innovation and technology advancements, leverages trade integration, and continues in its social transformation to become the next business frontier.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rodrigo Rey, also a second-year UCLA Anderson MBA student. I'm also Vice President for the Latin American Business Association and lead co-director for the organization of this Latin American Business Conference. I am delighted to welcome you all for joining us here today, especially our guest speakers, our students, our faculty members, alumni, sponsors, the Los Angeles business community, and special guests and friends of UCLA Anderson, UCLA, and the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce. I'd like to extend a special thank you note to all of our guests, some of whom have traveled from long distances in order to join us here today. And also to our conference sponsors, specifically the UCLA Anderson Center for Global Management, the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, the City National Bank, the Port of Los Angeles, the UCLA Latin American Institute, the UCLA Anderson Center for Media, Entertainment, and Sports, and UPS. Thank you so much for being here. And we also wanted to extend a special thank you note to some people who have joined us here today and for whom we're delighted to welcome here today, specifically the Consul Generals for the countries of Chile, Ecuador, and Costa Rica. In particular, I wanted to thank Lucy Allard and her team at the Center for Global Management, who always played a crucial role in organizing this fantastic event. And obviously, to Mr. Carlos Valderrama for the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for your support. This is going to be a fantastic conference. Without your support, it wouldn't have been like it is going to be right now. Last but not least, I would like to extend a special thank you note to all of the Latin American Business Association and Latino Business Student Association board members. With all your valuable support, this wouldn't have happened. This wouldn't be organized. Thank you so much. And to begin the conference, I would like to introduce to you Sebastian Edwards. He's a distinguished professor in Henry Ford's second chair in international management here at UCLA Anderson. He's also a faculty director for the Center for Global Management. Professor Edwards will also provide a macroeconomic overview for the Latin American region. And that is the result of an extensive experience in the region. From 1993 until 1996, Professor Edwards was the chief economist for Latin America and the Caribbean for the World Bank. He's author of more than 200 scientific articles on international economics, macroeconomics, and economic development. Please join me in thanking and welcoming Professor Edwards.
Thank you very much, Manuel and Rodrigo. It's a great honor for me to be once again opening the LABA conference. It's one of the great events that we have here at Anderson every year. And every year we think that it is going to be impossible for the students to put on a better conference the next year, but every year it happens. So one of the things that we teach our students is that in general, you cannot have incredible growth forever. And that's one of the topics of my presentation today, China, because of course what happens to China affects Latin America. But these guys, the students, are able to put a better and better conference every year, and that is quite amazing. I have a list of people to acknowledge, but Rodrigo and Manuel did a great job. So I'm just going to say thank you to everyone. Thanks in particular to Brian Stockton, the former CEO of Mattel, a company that has for many years helped kids dream around the world, and he's going to give the keynote speech. And so thanks, Brian, for joining us. He's a member of the board of visitors here at Anderson, and we're very grateful that he's here. We want to also acknowledge, of course, Carlos Valderrama and the LA Area Chamber of Commerce, and our sponsors, City National Bank, the Port of LA, UPS, UCLA Latin American Institute, and the Mimes Institute here at Center here at Anderson. Also, I want to acknowledge not only the Latin America Business Association here from Anderson, but also the UCLA Undergraduate Latino Business Student Association. We are very happy that they are partners and that they have participated actively in putting this conference together. So thank you to everyone. And let me now move to the topic of my brief presentation. So I want to talk about a macroeconomic overview of Latin America. But what I want to do is not focus on the region proper. I want to talk about the economic environment that Latin America faces. So there is a tremendous amount of pessimism in the media and among experts and investment banks and so on. So what I have here are just two very recent pieces. One by Citibank, rising risk of a global recession, and one by the Financial Times, a great newspaper, but an alarmist. They are always seeing the glass half empty, saying global slowdown spreads to the Eurozone. And if you follow the FT, they are extremely pessimistic. And what I want to argue are 2 points. One is that the Latin American countries, even Brazil, or maybe today Brazil more than anyone, do depend on what happens in the world economy. And if we want to understand what's going to happen to Latin America in the next 3-4 years, we need to have a picture, or even in a shorter period of time, we need to have a picture of what's going to happen to the global economy. And my take is that the pessimism that we see everywhere about the global economy, and these are very recent papers, as I said, is not justified. And what I would like to do is argue that the environment within which the Latin American countries are going to operate, it's not as gloomy as some people would like you to think it is. In addition to that, I think that the region has made a turn, an important turn, in terms of policy, and we are seeing that in particular, but not exclusively, in Argentina, where there is a new administration that is working very hard to bring the country back to international capital markets and to make Argentina, again, a normal country, a country where you can trust statistics, a country that has access to the capital market, and a country that lives up to its incredible potential. So what are the concerns about the global economy, and why do I think that they are unjustified or they are exaggerated? There is this concern about a global recession. And in order for there to be a global recession, it is required that the US goes into recession. There will not be a global, there may be a global slowdown, but not a global recession without the US going into a recession. Today is March 4th or 5th? 4th? Okay, I was ahead of my. Today is March 4th. Why is that important? Because it is the first Friday of the month. Why is the first Friday of the month very important? Because we get our labor statistics in the US. And today we had more than 220 new jobs created last month. The rate of unemployment continues to be 4.9%. So there's no recession in the US. There's no sign that things are slowing down. And I think that, and will argue a little bit more in detail, there is no particular concern in that regard. Another concern is China, and I'll talk a little bit more about China. And I will argue that there will be no crisis in China. There is a slowdown, but no crisis, something that people are very concerned about. Another concern is the US Federal Reserve. Will it continue to increase interest rates? And what should we think about it? And in conjunction with the Federal Reserve, of course, there's a concern of what's going on with other central banks. The most important paper in today's or story or analysis in today's media has to do exactly with interest rate differentials. And what we have on the one hand is that the US, the Fed, may continue to hike interest rates, while in a number of other countries, not in Latin America, but in a number of other countries, we are seeing that central banks are lowering interest rate, and we're having this divergence. And we need to, there's a concern about that, and we need to understand what's going to happen there. And other concerns are the future of the EU, Brexit, or now we have Nexit. So some of you know what, most of you know what Brexit is the British exiting the EU. They are not in the Eurozone, so but the EU. But now there is Nexit, and that's the Dutch got the idea that, well, if the Brits leave, maybe we should leave too. So now it's a double, the EU may be hit by a double whammy here. And then, of course, commodities, commodity prices, and currencies. So let me argue that the US will not go into recession, and I will not get into great detail in that regards. I just will mention the fact that today, as I pointed out, we got the new data from the labor market and jobs, and what we have is that it's very strong. It continues to, we continue to add jobs at a very healthy clip. Anything above 200,000 is very good. And the good news is that finally, labor market participation, that means the amount, the number of people that are looking for work, is going up. So we have a low rate of unemployment, 4.9%. For a while, part of that low rate of unemployment, when it was like 5 or 5.5 or 6, when it was coming down from its peak of 10%, part of it was the result of people deciding to get out of the labor market. And that was concerning. We were getting more and more people discouraged, not joining the labor market, in fact, staying home or shooting pool with their friends and drinking beer, or getting an MBA degree, which is better than drinking beer and shooting pool. Some people think that there's not much of a difference between the two activities, but of course we know better. There is a big, big difference. But now we have that more people are participating in the labor market, and still the rate of unemployment is below 5%, which is around the natural rate of unemployment for the US. Let me talk about China, because that is the main concern that we have. And let me tell you why for Latin America, China is particularly important. I think that I'm going to mostly talk about China, then we have to get going on with the rest of the program. But one of the points that I have been making for a few years, let me just actually show you this, because it's very interesting. There have been only 3 instances since 1993 where the Federal Reserve has increased interest rates in a systematic way. This is the first instance. And to a large extent, that move of interest rates by the Fed contributed to the Mexican peso crisis of December of 1994. this second episode contributed to the Argentine, the Uruguayan, and the Dominican Republic crisis of 2001 and 2002. And this hike, which is much more dramatic, much faster, much more significant, did nothing to Latin America. And the reason why Latin America survived, and not only survived, so here, Argentina, Uruguay, and so on, here, Mexico, and the domino effect, and so on, and contagion, and nothing here is because of China. Here, commodity prices were going through the roof. The price of almost anything that you produced or exported from Latin America was going up, 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 and up. In addition to that, policies were a little better in most countries, or in some significantly better, but that is the main reason why. So China is absolutely fundamental to understand the future of Latin America. The price of copper has gone to 1/2, the price of soybeans has gone to 1/2, and the question is what's going to happen to China. So I want to ask 3 questions about China and argue that we should not be so concerned. The first one, should we be surprised by the slowdown of the Chinese economy? The second one is, should we be concerned? And the third one, will the developments in China affect the Latin American economies? And the answers are no, no, and yes. We should not be surprised. We should not be overly concerned. We should be somewhat concerned. China is not going to come to an end. I think that China still is going to continue to have some problems, but it's not going to collapse. We ain't going to see in China a Latin American-style crisis. And yes, it will affect the food industry. It will affect commodities, and China has some problems. So let's start with a short discussion of what's going on in China and why has China all of a sudden become such an important topic and people are so scared. The reason for that is that the currency depreciated very significantly during the last few months. And this is the value of how many yuan or renminbi you have to pay per dollar. And you can see that in August of last year, there was this jump. And if you go back to the Latin American experience of the 1990s or even before that, there are many instances where you see this, except that the scale is much greater. In Argentina, 1 peso, $1 for 10 years, and then 4 pesos, $1. This is very small compared to it. But what has made people very, very worried is that all of a sudden the Chinese currency weakens in the sense that you need more local currency per dollar every period. And people think that this is a reflection of the weakness, basic weakness of the Chinese currency, and that it is going to result in a crisis. And the reason why people are concerned is because for years and years and years, the movement was in the opposite direction. The yuan was strengthening, and here we see this turnaround. But there's not going to be a crisis. This is not a reflection of China facing a major problem. It's not a reflection of China having lost its way. It is the consequence of the demands by the international community that China introduces more market forces into its currency market. What the Chinese had done until August of last year was totally control the currency market. The Chinese central bank had a 100% control over the currency market. And that explains why it didn't move. This is the yuan dollar rate. Every other currency in the world, pound dollar, yen dollar, Brazilian real dollar, it moves, not the yuan. And all of a sudden, the Chinese allowed it to move. In currency markets, the only way for the free market to operate is that you allow the currency sometime to go up, weaken, sometimes to go down, and it has to move both ways. And there's been a misunderstanding, and people have not understood that this is just adding market forces to the Chinese currency, and it is not a reflection that China is going to collapse. China has an incredible amount of reserves. These are official reserves. Of course, they have been coming down, but that's what reserves are for. It's money that you put away in order to use when you need using it. And it makes no sense that because you start using reserves in the way they should be used, which is when something happens, like you don't get payments in time or you get sick and you start using your savings, someone will say, oh, you're going to go bankrupt because you're using your savings. No, I put that money away in the savings account. In order to use it now, I am acting rationally and I am doing what I ought to do, and that's what China is doing. So if one puts together one thing and the other, I think that it is quite clear that China is not going to face, in spite of what some other people say, Paul Krugman and other friends, it's not going to have a major crisis. There are concerns, of course. This is corporate debt. China has a much higher corporate debt than the rest of the countries. But the Chinese, of course, are aware of that, and they are trying to bring it down in an orderly fashion. Now, I want to end up with the notion that this matters to Latin America, even if there is no crisis, because China is deaccelerating. And you can see that these are the rates of growth of the past. This is, of course, Lehman, but we see 12%, 10%, and growth is going down. But my point here, my points are three. The first one is that, or four maybe, still this growth is absolutely remarkable, 6%. Okay? And even if it has slowed down, this is an amazing rate of growth. The second point is that we should not be surprised at all. This is a paper that was published in 2003 by Goldman, and where they coined the term BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, and China. And this is the projection that they made at the time, which was considered to be exotic because of how positive and optimistic Goldman Sachs was about China. Okay? And this is what they did. And people, when they saw this picture, you may remember, and Goldman Sachs said China is going to catch up with all, in terms of size of its economy, with all the G6 countries. People said it's impossible. It's not going to happen. China is going to surpass Japan. People said it cannot happen. Goldman is too optimistic. And this is what Goldman predicted China was going to have as a rate of growth during this decade, 5%. So we're doing much better. We are doing much better. So it's not surprising. All you have to do is read this paper and any other paper that was based on real solid data to know that China was going to slow down. That's what happens in every time countries catch up, but they don't surpass others forever. Right? The only time that happens is with the LABA conference. The program gets better and better and better. Okay? So we should not be surprised. Should we be overly concerned? I already told you we should not be overly concerned. One thing that has happened that has gone semi-unnoticed is that, and this is why in some way it's affecting us, China had a huge surplus in its external accounts, and now that has disappeared. China now has a normal surplus. Any imbalance of external accounts between +3 and -3% is within normal. China was a great surplus country, now it's not. And people have not noticed this either. The other side of this is that the US was a great deficit country, 6% of GDP, and now it's normal. So what we're seeing is that the global economy, there's a sick man in the global economy, and that's, well, two maybe, Japan and the EU, but the US and China, they have reduced their imbalances, and that is good for the world economy. Is this going to affect us? Yes, it's going to affect us because I don't think that that commodity prices are going to increase anytime soon. And this brings us to the topic of this conference, which is that because commodity prices are not going to increase, we need in Latin America more innovation. We need a diversified export sector. we need more and better trade. We need strategic alliances like the ones that we're going to be talking about here between like, the Latin American countries and the Port of Los Angeles. And we need greater productivity improvement. And when we go back, and I will finish with this, to my graph on the Federal Reserve interest rate, and we look at the third rate increase in that rate, and I said nothing happened in Latin America, it's important to notice what I said, why nothing happened. And that's because of China and commodity prices. And a little bit of better policies. But not enough has been done in the region to increase productivity. And that is absolutely necessary to move in that direction. This is what we're going to be discussing in this conference. And that's why the students have put together such a great, this is for my students, a Taylor rule, finally. Huh? This is the Taylor rule, very important. Let me finish with this. This is the third time I finish. What will the Federal Reserve do? We have in the next few weeks meetings of the Bank of Japan. Mario Draghi has promised that he's going to increase liquidity in Europe. Will the Federal Reserve continue to increase interest rates? And the problem is that if the Federal Reserve hikes interest rates, the dollar will continue to strengthen. And if the dollar strengthens, by definition, other currencies weaken. And most Latin American countries already have weakened too much and people are distressed. In particular, companies that have borrowed in foreign currency. Right? So what will the Fed do? If the Fed continues to increase interest rates, either the Latin American currencies will depreciate, will weaken, or the Latin American central banks will have to follow the Fed and increase interest rates as well, as it has happened in Mexico, in Peru, in Colombia, in Chile, almost everywhere except in Brazil, of course, because they have so high Selic rates that they cannot continue to increase them. So what will the Fed do? Let's look again at history. There's only one incident, one, when the Fed raised interest rates, stopped, and the next move was to lower them. So you have to ask yourself, when did that happen? Answer, 1999. Why? What happened in 1998? What happened in 1998? The Asian crisis. So the Fed stopped. They thought that they were going to increase the rates and continue. They stopped because the world almost collapsed. July 4th, 1997, Thailand, followed by the Philippines, Malaysia, and Korea at the end of the year. So for the Fed, it seems to me for the next move of the Fed to go down, to be down, or to reinstate quantitative easing, we need a major catastrophe, which I don't see in my radar. So to sum up, I am more optimistic. I see some clouds in the horizon. Those clouds require better management, better economic policy, more innovation, and those are going to be better trade, and those are going to be the topics of this conference. So once again, I want to thank our speakers and congratulate our students and thank Lucy Allard and her team for putting together such a wonderful event. Thank you so much.